This is the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores why one wants to be in the D. I am your host, Feodorship III, the director of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. Join me as I interview students, scholars, leaders, and innovators about living, working, and loving in Detroit. Good day, and welcome to the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores what makes one want to be in the D. Our next guest is a native Detroiter and graduate of Detroit Public Schools, the University of Michigan, and Wayne State University. She has worked in Detroit Public Schools for more than 20 years, originally a middle school science teacher, and currently the Deputy Superintendent for External Partnerships in Enrollment and Specialty Programming for DPSD. Ladies and gentlemen, Alycia Meriweather.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it. We already mentioned you were born and raised in the city of Detroit. What were some of your fondest memories of going to school in Detroit Public Schools?
You know, I have so many great memories about my experience in DPS. I attended Edmondson for Head Start. So I always say I've been with the district since I was 4 years old. So I started as a Head Start student at Edmondson Elementary. That was my neighborhood school. That's where I grew up over by the Jeffries Projects. Not far from here, just a little bit further down, Martin Luther King, basically in Trumbull and Warren area. And then I attended Golightly Educational Center. And then I went to high school at Renaissance High School, graduated. You must be a technician.
Yes.
Okay, well that's okay. I love all DPS graduates. I have much love, but I have a lot of fond memories. I mean, when I think about Edmondson, my early years, one of the memories I have is really about this nursery rhyme play that we did. So I have pictures of me dressed up, and I had a part, and I remember being on this stage that seemed so huge, and now when I go back, it's very small. But just feeling about, those experiences that allowed me to grow, to express myself creatively, to interact with other students. Really good memories from Edmondson. At Golightly, a lot of great teachers. I mean, there used to be a tradition at DPS that seniors who had a certain GPA or higher were invited to the superintendent's banquet, and they could invite their favorite teacher. And my favorite teacher who came with me to that banquet was Dr. Alycia who was my 6th grade teacher. And she just saw a lot of potential in me and really encouraged me. She wanted me to be a doctor. When I told her I was going to be a teacher, she tried to convince me out of that to be a doctor, but ultimately she accepted my choice as a noble one, and that's what I felt called to do. But that and our 8th grade trip to DC, I remember that being a formative piece of my growing up there. And then Renaissance, I always tell anyone, my experiences at Renaissance fully prepared me for the University of Michigan in terms of academics. And it was a small environment at the time, lots of great memories, just the cohesiveness, the community, the way that the leadership led that building around Renaissance as a whole, not dividing us into different subgroups, We are Renaissance, and the big brother, big sister program there where every freshman had a senior who kind of took them under their wing. I had great teachers there. I was on the sports teams. I did drama. I just had a really well-rounded experience at Renaissance.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. At CAS, it was big separation, curriculums, and
Yes.
lots of separation. So what inspired you to pursue a career in education?
You know what? I often get asked that question, and honestly, it's hard to pinpoint. I just know from the time I was little, from the time I was 8, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew it. I put my stuffed animals together. I taught them lessons. I would put my little sisters in there. I gave them report cards. I gave them homework. I knew from the time I was little I wanted to be a teacher. Both of my parents were educators. My mom was a school librarian, and my dad was a science teacher, middle school and high school. I have to believe that played some role. My grandmother, my mom's mom, was also a teacher. So I believe that influenced me in some way. But I always grew up wanting to help. I always grew up wanting to teach. I was a camp counselor. I ran, youth group. I worked at the Y. I mean, I just always was doing things with children. And honestly, for me, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I always knew I wanted to come back to Detroit. Those are two non-negotiables from the time I was little.
Cool. Okay. So what advice would you give a young person today who told you that they want to pursue a career in K through 12 education?
I'd say it's the best decision you could ever make. I would also say it is really hard work. And I think sometimes people go into education for the aspirational piece, the inspirational piece, which of course is important. I mean, there's honestly nothing like having a former student tell you that they changed, their course of life because of you. I mean, you cannot find another career where people come back 20, 30 years later and say, thank you because of what you said to me in the hall that day, because of what you taught me, because of the experiences that we had in your classroom. I chose to be an engineer. I chose to do this or that or the other thing. I mean, I don't know how you put into words just what that means. And I taught middle school science my whole time teaching. So sometimes they take a little while to say thank you, but when they say thank you, it is super meaningful. And I have had many experiences where people come up to me at the store, at a restaurant. One that comes to mind right now, my husband and I have a date night every Friday, and this was before the pandemic, and we were out to dinner, and my husband said, "There's somebody keeps looking at you. I think they know you." And so I got up to leave, and this woman stood up, and she grabbed my arm, and she said, "Excuse me, are you Miss Meriweather?" And I said, "I am." And she said, I kept telling my husband, this is my husband, I kept telling him he needed to say something to you." She went on to say, I never had you as a teacher. I went to Farwell, but I never had you as a teacher. My husband had you, and we all went to Pershing together. Okay. And she said, your name has come up so many times in the 15 years we've been married that when he said that was you, I told him we had to stop you. We had to tell you. And so she went on to say that these kids that had gone to Pershing together, they still get together. And they were hanging out, and I guess they just throw out philosophical questions. And one of the questions was, name the most influential people in your life. And she said, the other 3 students who had me and then gone on to Pershing named me as one of the most influential people in their lives that literally poured into them and made them different. And I mean, I started crying, and the student is like, "I'm sorry, Miss Meriweather." I said, "No." My husband said, "No, she needs to hear that because, I know that the work that I have done and that I do matters just inherently. But when you have someone tell you that, he literally recited the things that I taught him about chemical reactions. I took them on canoe trips to learn about ecosystems, and we built rockets. We made soap out of fat. We did all these things in the classroom. He was 30-something years old and could recount those things. And there's just nothing like it. So I would tell people it is everything you hear it is in terms of inspiration and satisfaction, but it is hard work. So if you don't understand all of the components that go in, you don't just automatically get to the thank you. You don't automatically get to the, you changed my life situation. It's a lot of hard work. And particularly in the urban context and in the city of Detroit, I think the stakes are so much higher with the challenges so much greater that if you are not well prepared for those elements of challenge, it can be very, very discouraging. And if you don't understand the key components of relationship building, there's that saying, it says, people don't care what you know until they know you care. And how do you express care to young people in a way that also puts parameters of respect, culture and climate? Those things are just as important as your content knowledge, because if you don't know how to manage a classroom, if you don't know how to create a space of respect and inquiry and challenge with, basically challenging ideas, but in a respectful way, you can have chaos pretty quickly. And if you can figure out how to make that space safe for both intellectual and social emotional discovery, there's just nothing like it. It is an amazing, amazing career.
That sounds awesome. Now, I've read that middle school is the time when young people really make the decision whether or not they're going to truly invest in education or opt out. As a former middle school teacher, how do you keep the students engaged? How do you try to keep them on that path to choose education?
You know, there's so much happening in middle school. I mean, when I talk to people, I say, remember what it was like for you to be in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade?
Oh my goodness.
And most people say, I do not want to go back there. It's a rough time in life in terms of, you know, you're first of all, your body's changing, your hormones are coming in. You are really trying to develop your own thinking. You're trying to establish yourself, you know, as an individual and mark out your space. And so there's a lot of dialogue and like power elements of a young person trying to come into their own. And part of coming into your own is like, what do I think about these things? And so education is one of those things. And I think, you know, part of it is you have to set up an environment that's inviting, that is respectful, that is well thought out in terms of exposing young people to careers, to options. I often tell young people, whether it's middle school or high school, you know, it is just as important to learn what you don't like to do as it is to learn what you do like to do. And that's part of science, really, at its core, is you learn what doesn't work. That's a valuable lesson. And if you learn what does work, great. But both are valuable. It's not more valuable to learn that you love engineering and that you don't like, you know, medicine. Yeah. Both are equally valuable. So when we can figure out ways to help young people kind of get a vision of what they like to do, I think a lot of times we ask young people, like, who do you want to be? What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do? But I like the question, who do you want to be? Yeah. You know, who do you want, what kind of person do you want to be? And what do you like to do? And if you can figure out where those two things intersect, bonanza, right? Like, I'm fortunate because I found out where two things intersect. I know what I like to do, and I know who I want to be. And I'm allowed to, those two things intersect for me. And it's a purpose in my living that I think makes everything that I do much more joyful, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we just ask kids the wrong question.
No, I mean, I think you got a point there. I mean, that's a much better question. Who do you want to be?
Who do you want to be?
Yeah, because who do you want to do is just very narrow. It's all about the work. But
what do you like to do?
There's a lot more to that.
You could do a lot of different things with what you like to do. And let's figure out what those are. What do careers look like? And in the district, we've been doing a lot of work around career academies and really building out pathways for young people to explore various careers, basically. And we have, you know, career days traditionally, but we also have done a lot of deeper work around basically the 7 industry clusters, that's what they're called, and really digging in about coursework, dual enrollment, work-based learning experiences. And if we can, you know, do that in high school, and we've also done exploration experiences in middle school. But if you can do that early on and say, well, I really liked that. I want to learn more about that. And then we help kids get on that path through their high school experience. High school then becomes more meaningful. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm enjoying what I'm learning. And I'm seeing a connection to where I'm going. And for young people, even as young as middle school or younger, the more we can expose them to like what's out there, what are possible careers, like you like to do this, there's this whole wide variety of things you could potentially do. And then I also tell kids, you know, it's important for you to have a mentor, but oftentimes you kind of need 2 mentors. And they go along the 2 questions that I just said. Who do you want to be? Find someone who lives their life that way. That's one type of mentor. Okay. What do you like to do? That's probably a different mentor. Yeah. If you're blessed, it's the same person, but it doesn't always happen. Like the person who's highly skilled in what you want to do may not live life the way you want to live. They may not treat people you think, you know, you can learn how to do the skill from them, but you may not want to learn how to treat people from them. So you may need a couple mentors. So I tell people that. So.
Okay. So you seem like you're a very passionate, enthusiastic teacher. How did you make the decision to move into administration?
Very, very hard decision. Honestly, and I still miss teaching. I really just loved teaching. I loved relationship building with young people. I loved the beauty of seeing kids go from hating science to it being their favorite class. I enjoyed being able to help kids work through, issues and try to help them really build skills for life. Like, okay, how do we problem solve here? How do you deal with this anger you have? And when you're not feeling well, how do you communicate in a way that doesn't make things worse? How do you, these are skills for life. And then also, really equipping young people with deep knowledge in the sciences, helping them understand science is not too hard for you. It's not too hard for you. And really this idea of when kids would get to a point, they're like, that's easy. And when you have 7th graders talking about chemical equations being easy, that's easy. And I would always say to them, everything's easy when you know it. Until then, it's not. But for you to say it's easy, that means we've made some progress here. And for me to leave all of that was a really challenging decision. But honestly, I had been doing some curriculum writing. I had been doing professional development sessions with other teachers. I had been one of the classrooms that other teachers were sent to visit to kind of see how do you teach middle school science in Detroit. And I had been doing these different things, and I started feeling like I could make a bigger difference if I could actually impact other teachers. So for me, I had 180 students I was impacting, every semester. It's a lot of kids. But when you think about there being, at that time, like 25,000 middle school kids in the city, and if I could impact another teacher to make science more interesting, to give them tips and tools around classroom management, then I'm now impacting way more kids than just my sphere.
You become a force multiplier.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's what pushed me to make the decision. But I will be honest, the first couple of years out of the classroom, I cried almost every day because I missed it. I missed it so much. And then a lot of what I was doing when I first came out of the classroom as a supervisor was going into the classrooms of ineffective teachers, where I was being called in to, observe, to give feedback, to help get them on track. And so I was going into classrooms with kids just like my kids who were in a situation of chaos, where there was no learning happening. And so that, in addition to missing teaching, seeing the injustice that was happening with young people where I knew it didn't need to be like this, but the person in charge had resigned themselves to it is what it is, and that it's these kids. And I always tell people what triggers me most is when I hear someone say, these kids, those kids, and sometimes them kids. But in any case, it's not the adult, it's everybody else. Like, I have no advocacy here, nothing I can do about this. It's just chaos. So we just have to roll with it. And that was really difficult because I knew it didn't need to be that way, and that would move me from anger to sadness, back to anger, to then I've got to work with this person to help them change. Because they're impacting, just like I talked about, I had 180 kids I was influencing. They were influencing 180 kids in a really negative way. And so that was the most challenging thing, is to see the inequities that were happening across the district. Anyone who leaves the classroom and goes to other classrooms, that's when you see what's happening. Because when you're a teacher, it's one of the few professions where you're pretty isolated.
Yeah.
I mean, you go in your room and that's
You're
your
there
world.
all day. Yeah.
The beauty of it is it's your world. It's the world you build. But the downside of it is that you that's all you know. And so when you start getting out there, I mean, I will say I saw awesome teaching also, but that's not what consumed my time.
Yeah.
The principal didn't call to have you come observe an awesome teacher. They called because they needed some help. So it was really hard those first couple of years, but I was able to help teachers along the continuum. I was able to shift mindset around what we expect from young people. I was able to model lessons. I was able to show what was possible. I'm not going to say everything was a success. People have to want to change.
Yeah.
But I was able to, really do some professional development, write curriculum, and make a difference in that way too. So I don't regret leaving the classroom at all, because I think my sphere of influence is larger. But I will say my heart of hearts is kids.
That's awesome. And how would you describe your current role? My current role, the sphere of influence now is the entire district. And so it's not just middle school science and it's not just science. It's what I do now is related to partnerships, adult education, career technical education, our charter school portfolio, the Office of School Health and Wellness, which has our chief health officer, all of our nurses in the buildings, and right now COVID, everything COVID is back up under my umbrella.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And I also lead the special projects team, and the special projects team gets projects that are unique and usually a launch of some sort. So the school at Marygrove opening was one of our special projects that my team led. Moving Davis Aerospace back to the airport is another project we've been working on. That's a long-term project, but that's one of the projects we're working on. Southeastern, the Advanced Manufacturing Academy that's being put in there, built out with Stellantis. So those are the types of projects that I get to work on with the special projects team. And then two big ones that probably a lot of people know about would be the hydration stations for the district. So when we found lead and copper in the water, we determined that the best way to solve that problem was to install hydration stations at the water source. So we raised over $3 million for that. Our facilities team did an awesome job of installation, and now all of our schools have hydration stations, so clean water coming out from the source. And another project I worked on was the Connected Futures project. So when we shifted to online learning at the beginning of the pandemic, we knew that 80% of our students did not have an educationally adequate device or internet, and that's a problem in the middle of the pandemic. And so we were pulled together. We pulled together, major DTE Foundation was basically the spearhead of the fundraising efforts, but Quicken, Skillman, you've got Kellogg, you've got all of these different organizations that came together, and then tons of others that donated. We raised $23 million in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And that project, I tell people that's one of the projects, in my whole life, that will be one of the projects that I list as one of the most significant projects I worked on, because we, through that project, were able to distribute 47,000 devices with internet and tech support and training. So a lot of different organizations did different things in the pandemic. They gave out devices, they gave out this, but the plan that we put together had those 4 components: device, internet access, tech support where you could actually physically bring your device back if it got broken, a hotline that you could call if you needed help, and then we had parental sessions as well as student sessions for training. And then it's a sustainable plan, because as our devices get phased out, we'll refurbish them through human IT, and then they can be purchased again. They can go back into circulation. So those are the types of things I get to work on now. And I think, when I think about the fact that as a little kid I wanted to be a teacher, I wanted to impact kids' lives in the city of Detroit, the fact that everything I've been able to do, including right now, is a manifestation of that vision. It just looks a little different along the journey. Is very satisfying.
Oh, I can only imagine. So what are some of the future goals for DPSCD?
I think, there's a lot right now. For the last 2 years, as you know, we've been pivoting with COVID. And this year is really about recovery. It's really about academic, social, emotional recovery. We currently have about 46,000 kids in about 107 buildings. So we are face-to-face right now, and then we also opened a virtual school that has about 1,300 kids.
Okay.
So people had to make a choice this fall. If you're coming back face-to-face, it's one of our brick-and-mortar buildings. If you don't feel like you're ready to come back face-to-face, you can go to the virtual school. So they log on just like they did last year, but you cannot be enrolled in a brick-and-mortar and the virtual school. You had to make a choice. Okay. But we will hold your spot for 1 year at your previous school. So I think, the virtual school is something I think that will continue in terms of future. It's not just because of COVID. What we know, COVID, it's so hard to talk about COVID because there was so much loss in the city and so much devastation, and that virus has just destroyed so much. The flip side of it is, in the midst of adversity, things were born, right? So the virtual school is something that I think parents and students, some parents and students, were looking for prior to the pandemic. What we heard from families is some families are still concerned about COVID. That's why they chose the virtual school. But some families just felt like the virtual environment was better for them. And so opening up additional opportunities. And I think the other thing that the district is looking at long-term is, just as many opportunities as we can offer for families. We've opened up tuition-free Montessori. We have STEM-based schools. We have dual language schools. We have IB. We have AP at all of our high schools now. Like I said, the Career Academy work is really significant at all of the high schools. I think you can look at just ways that we're trying to dig deeper into mental health. One thing I didn't mention, but some of the COVID money that we received was allocated to increasing Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. So that's small group and individual counseling for students. And so we actually expanded that to 86 additional schools with the COVID money. The other schools had some sort of support. We will continue to push in on mental health. I think, COVID revealed a lot of things related to mental health, but those things were there before. I think COVID just amplified, and we know that our kids need additional mental health services, expanding that, really looking at the whole child commitment with school-based health centers and other health-related items, whether that's dental, vision, physicals. I think you're going to see more work around that. Obviously, very concerned about proficiency and academic gains. We have implemented multiple reading intervention strategies and really being very, very intentional about getting students up to grade level. It's not just enough to make progress. We need to make progress, but we have to get kids up to proficiency, to grade level, because it is not acceptable to come out of high school and you are not at high school level. So you finished your 13 years of school, but you are not at a 12th grade level, not acceptable. So really pushing in on how do we do that? How do we adopted new curriculum that is aligned to the standards. We've done a cultural relevancy review of our curriculum to make sure that the materials are more culturally sensitive and culturally relevant. I'm trying to think. We've got so many things going on. There's a lot. I think another big thing I would lift up, and I'll stop, is we are going to have a 20-year facility plan that is going to be presented in January that is basically going to outline the footprint of the district for the next 20 years.
Okay.
About $700 million of the COVID relief funding will be dedicated to our facilities, and where it's invested will be dependent on that 20-year plan that will be vetted through the community and approved by the board. So it's something to pay attention to. Yeah.
Well, you touched upon some of this, but I'm curious, in your position in this age of school of choice and all the different options and opportunities out there for parents, what would you say, why would you encourage, why should a parent choose DPSCD?
I think there's a lot of reasons why people should choose DPSCD. Let's start with number one. DPSCD is a school district that is run by an elected, empowered board. So let me just start with that point. When you start talking about schools of choice, you're talking about entities that are being run by appointed boards that do not have accountability to the citizens. So let's just start with that distinction, that the school system...
No accountability. Okay.
Well, you're synthesizing,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that when you live in a democratic state, which America claims to be, then you elect your officials, you hold them accountable, and that is what happens with public school systems. You elect school board members, and the school board is who runs the district. The school board has one employee, that's the superintendent. The superintendent hires and fires everybody else. So in the world of schools, your school board is who runs the district. Detroit Public Schools Community District has an elected, empowered board now, again, after emergency management, and they have an appointed superintendent. That team runs this district. when you start looking at schools of choice and you dig into the boards, they're appointed boards. A lot of times they are not residents of the city of Detroit. Let's talk about the schools that exist in the city that are being run by boards, people sitting on the board that may not live in the city, may not have connection to the city, and they certainly aren't elected by the citizens of the city. So let me start with that. Number two, when you look at what's happening with DPSCD at scale, so when you start talking about 50,000 kids, 6,000 employees, largest school district in the state of Michigan, there are certain things we can do that nobody else can do. There are certain things at scale that we're able to offer that you can't do at a smaller scale. So when you start talking about even mental health, psychologists, social workers, counselors, resources, we are able to fund those items. We are able to enter into contracts with people, and we're also entering into MOUs at no cost to provide services. I mean, at scale, you have access to a lot of other resources. I think third, when you look at what's happening in terms of just the district rebuild and the curriculum that we're using that's aligned to standards, you look at the training that our staff has had, not only in social emotional learning, but restorative practices. You look at the shift that we're making even around public safety and how we approach policing and public safety and our code of conduct and changes we've made, our anti-racist resolution. I mean, all of these structures and systems are really being put in place to create a space of equity, inclusion, and really excellence. Now, it's a process. So what we're trying to do as a whole system is move to a system of excellence, not just pockets of excellence. And I think we are at a point at the district where we've put systems in place, we have protocols in place, we have board policies in place that have laid all the groundwork. We've increased teacher salary to be one of the highest paid in the state. We're recruiting incredible talent. People want to be in the district. And what I tell people is, this district is going to be the story of the greatest turnaround of urban education. And you can either be a part of it or you can be a spectator, because either way it's going to happen. And it's going to take some more time, but we are on the way. Like I told you from the beginning, I've been with this district since I was 4 years old. This is the most excited I've been about who we are, where we're going. It doesn't mean it's easy. But what I would also say is this work, just as when I was a teacher, this work is so critically important because of the multiple challenges that young people in the city face. It is incredibly important that the public school system that serves everyone, that does not turn anyone away, is providing the most excellent service. So that's what we do every day. We are on a mission to do that, and those are the reasons I would say you need to know this district is run by an elected, empowered board who cares deeply about the children of the city of Detroit, and they're accountable to the citizens. You have a superintendent who is passionate about children, who is passionate about equity, who does not settle for less than excellence, and decisions are made with children at the forefront, as well as, what do we need to do to get them where they need to go, holding himself, cabinet, everyone to high standards. And when you have people like that leading, you can be assured we're going in the right direction. And I do encourage people to make that choice. And with 107 choices, there's got to be a school that can work for you and your family. And I just do not think that there is a reason that citizens of Detroit should go outside the city to find a quality education. That should not be happening.
Yeah, lots of options in the city. You touched upon this a little bit earlier, but how would you assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the children and their learning?
I mean, there's multiple research articles, there's multiple stories, documenting the learning loss that's happened during COVID. There's multiple stories on the strain of mental health as students and families were confined, quarantined, basically isolated. It's hard to quantify. I don't think we're going to see the full effect until years from now. But I mean, the impact on learning, when we shifted from face-to-face to online, in addition to the struggle of securing the devices, the internet, making sure that kids were actually able to log on. Once we got that taken care of, then you're dealing with, there's certain things that happen in a school. The beauty of school, the things I talked about earlier that made me passionate about being a teacher, the conversations you have in the hallway, the just the look that you get from a student when they come into your classroom. Their walk is a little off. They always are, fidgeting, and today they're down. You can't always pick that up in the virtual world. And so I think there were a lot of things that were missed, that, students needed help in different ways, whether that was for academic. They didn't want to raise their golden hand. When you're in the virtual environment, you have to raise your golden hand, you have to come off mute. In the classroom, you can kind of wander around, or you're walking up and down aisles and you can see someone struggling. And so, you don't have to call them out, you don't have to embarrass them. You just come over next to them and you can give them some help. And just those kinds of interventions became much more difficult in the pandemic. So I think, getting kids caught up is the order of the day across the country, certainly here in terms of academics. But you're also looking at the weight, social, emotional, mental weight. I mean, we have a lot of kids who have lost people through death. I mean, families who have lost mothers and fathers and grandparents, and the weight of that on a child, and just even, there's other things I've read that just talk about, as a world, as Americans, watching the impact, the death tolls. You're watching this every day, and it weighs on all of us. I think when you talk about the effect of COVID on kids, it's like in science where all of the particles get smashed together and you get this very hard sedimentary rock. I feel like that's what's happened with kids, is the layers of pressure of economics, the layer of pressure of death, the layer of pressure of the political shenanigans that were happening at the same time, and the consistent cycle of evidence of, which we have already known existed, but evidence of, video footage of historic, systemic, and current racism in this country. So when you talk about all of those things and kids were in isolation trying to process, you now have kids who are coming back to school right now who have not been in circulation for 2 years.
Wow.
And so what you're seeing is, not just the academic gap, but you're seeing the social gap. They haven't had to interact with 30 other students. They haven't had to interact in the lunchroom with 100 other students. You understand? There's a lot to it. And, I just want to say to our teachers and our principals and people running buildings right now, I mean, thank you, because what is happening in schools right now is nothing short of heroic. I mean, the pandemic was heroic. Teaching and parents were teaching, and but now we're at a different type of heavy lift, and getting people back on track, socializing again, working through conflict, and then the academic piece. It's all this mixed together, and I think we are going to be dealing with this for quite some time.
Yeah, we are. I wish it was over, but it keeps going on. So one of the things as the pandemic has gone on, you mentioned the heroic nature, the heroic actions of teachers and principals, people coming together. How would you say DPSD is engaged in holding the community together during this time?
Wow. Well, I would start with, even going back to the beginning of the pandemic, and our Office of School Nutrition team pivoted immediately to set up food distribution centers. We served millions of meals during the pandemic, and we actually shifted to giving out 7 days of food from those distribution sites. So we gave out 4 meals at a time and then 3 meals at a time to, however many kids were in the household. And to be honest, didn't matter if they were DPSCD or not. If you have 7 kids, you're getting 7 days worth of food for 7 children. And our essential workers shifted to packing those boxes. And then we also mobilized our bus routes, because we weren't running buses anymore. We mobilized them to deliver boxes to our medically fragile students.
Okay.
So I would say that the food delivery, in terms of supporting the community, holding the community together, I think shifting, obviously I already mentioned Connected Futures. So, not just sitting back and saying, well, we're gonna run paper packets. I mean, if we had not acted then, I don't know what would have happened, because we were in this way longer than we thought we were going to be. And if we had not mobilized in that way, education would have looked totally different. It would have been distribution of packets every week for months. That would not have been as rich of an experience. I think the other piece is, we shifted to a lot of online virtual town halls, and during the time, we had never done virtual town halls before, really. All of our public engagement meetings, family and community engagement meetings were in person. And we shifted to like Teams Live events and really moved it to an online portal, and we saw participation go way up. And so we will continue that. But sharing information, communicating information, the mental health hotline that we started, homework hotline that we started, home visits. I don't want to say the wrong number, but I know even this fall, our team has done over 30,000 home visits, knocking on doors, checking on kids. But during the pandemic, going out, visiting houses, checking, how are you doing? What can we do to help you? I mean, the teams that were out on the front lines and just trying to reach out, trying to connect, I think all of those are examples of what the district proactively did to hold the community together, putting a nurse at every school, installing temperature scanners at every single school. So there's these pieces of safety, and how do you hold a community together if they don't feel safe? So looking at, we put a nurse at every school, we have a temperature scanner, we're doing weekly saliva testing at every single school. It's required for employees, but optional for kids. We have 52% of our kids that have signed up for testing every week. These are people who seem healthy. They're asymptomatic. There are a lot of healthy people out there that have COVID. So we are finding that, and that's a layer of safety and protection that we put in place. I think also just communicating that we care. At the end of the day, people really do need to know that you care and that this is hard. No one alive really, there's very few people alive who have been through something like this, right? I think the statistics, I don't know what it is, but the last time something like this happened was a long time ago. And
Over
so we are
100
going
years.
through unprecedented times, and I think to approach it with empathy, listening. So we did a lot of listening to what families were saying and trying to make adjustments, what staff was saying, trying to make adjustments, which is why this year we shifted from last year we had a virtual option, a face-to-face option, and a learning center. So our principals were in essence running 3 different schools. Very, very intense. We listened to that feedback and said, this year, you're at the face-to-face school or you're in the virtual school. We'll still give you an option. We heard you want an option, but we have to make things more streamlined for our staff. And so I think that's a lot of what we did in terms of holding the community together, is listening. And I always say it's a really dangerous thing to not ask people what they think, but it's even more dangerous to ask people what they think and not do anything with what you heard. So this piece about listening, and then what do you do about it? Because don't ask me and then don't do anything
about it.
And so we've been very intentional about trying to listen, and then what do we do about it? And if we can't do it, why not? So don't just let things go into the abyss. Why can't we do it? Is there a legal reason we can't do it? Is there a financial reason we can't do it? Here's your idea. We've thought about it. We're not able to implement, and here's why. We can disagree, but here's why we can't do it. And I think all of those are ways that we've held the community together and continue to hold the community together. We opened up tech hubs. Those hubs were where people could bring their device. They could get mental health services there. They could get food there. There was utility assistance there. We opened up these hubs across the entire city. And these are all things that were not in the work plan. You know what I'm saying? Like, we had other plans when COVID hit, and the district pivoted to say this is what the community needs.
No, that's some awesome work. It sounds like a very strong pivot. We're going to switch it up just a little bit and get more into you. What kind of self-care routine do you practice?
Good question. All this talk about mental health and wellness. Honestly, my biggest self-care, is several things. My husband and I go walking or running multiple times a week. It's getting dark earlier now. It's getting harder, but we're still going to run in the turkey trot. So we got some miles we've got to get together. We have date night every Friday. Every other day of the week, I may be very, very busy. He's busy, but date night. We've been married 25 years this October, and we've never changed that. That is a form of self-care. It's like, look, no matter what's going on, we're going out. Or during the pandemic, we're staying in, but we're not doing work. And so those two things, I think, making time for, friends, whether that is during the pandemic, even setting up Zoom meetings, but now just being intentional about connecting with people who you can be a sounding board, who you don't have to fight with about your belief system necessarily. Like, there's a group of people where you are in alignment about your core values. Like, my work matters to me. This is what I do, and this is what I believe in. I don't want to fight with you about our students don't deserve what they're getting. I don't want to have that fight in my private time. I want to be with people who get that funding for public education is not equitable. And so surrounding myself with people in that space. Now, I still have to, have conversations with people who don't agree with me, but that's not how I spend my recharge time. Yeah. I'm not going to spend my recharge time arguing with people. So I surround myself with people that are life-giving, right, and encouraging. And I love movies. Didn't go to the movies for almost 2 years or whatever it is. But movies, going on the river walk. One of my best ways to recharge is being by water, and that can be the Detroit River, on Belle Isle, on the river walk. Does not matter. It can be someplace warm also, but I have not been on a plane in a while. But those are the ways. Honestly, just walking around Belle Isle is one of my favorite things to do. The perimeter, and just hearing the water, seeing the boats. Those are all things that I do to kind of take care of myself, in addition to prayer, and really just spending time in reflection. Okay.
I like how you slipped in prayer at the end.
Well, I should have started with prayer. That, but that's the basis of everything.
And I pray.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what are you reading?
Unfortunately, right now, nothing enjoyable. In terms of, a lot of my reading is related to COVID. A lot of my reading is related to reports and charts and graphs. I have committed to a daily devotional that I read, but outside of that, I really don't have pleasure reading. Okay. To be honest, I'm consumed with stuff I have to read to stay up on all the topics.
Are you listening to anything?
Listening, what I listen to, not in terms of, to be honest, what I listen to is music, is my kind of go-to. I have Pandora, and I hit the shuffle, and I'm always surprised at what comes up on my shuffle because I have wide interests. Okay. And I get joy out of that. Like, that is my, just relax. I guess that's a form of self-care too, is I like to listen to music.
Okay. Where do you like to go eat in the city?
Oh, well, my husband, if he were here right now, he would say that's the only place we like to eat is in the city. So I am very intentional. We do eat outside of the city, but I'm very intentional. I'm a Detroiter. I'm a Detroit girl, and I want to support Detroit businesses. And so honestly, I'm always looking at, what's opened, what's new, but also have some, standard, go-tos. Of course, I live over in Southwest, so, Los Galanes, you look at, various Mexican restaurants, downtown. It's hard for me to pick anything, but in terms of one item, one place, but anywhere, like Josh, my husband, will always say, okay, what's the list? And we just try different different restaurants.
Okay.
Of course, Pizzapopolis is a favorite from growing up. I have to give a shout out to that.
Yeah.
The Greek salad and the Pizzapopolis, that'll always be one of my favorites. Not the healthiest. No offense, Pizzapopolis, but it is one of my favorites.
Hanging out in Greek Town at Trappers Alley and all that.
Yes,
high
that
school,
the old
good
days.
old days.
Yes, the good old
Yeah.
days. Yes.
Okay. You mentioned some of the people the people you like to spend your time with, but where do you like to socialize in the city?
To be honest, that is, there hasn't been much of that recently,
Yeah.
to be honest. So lately, what I've done is meet people like at Eastern Market and walk down the DeQuinder Cut or walk outside.
Yeah.
So the River Walk, DeQuinder Cut, Eastern Market, Belle Isle. So that's what I would say right now is the most current. I'm not hanging out.
It's the times.
I'm not hanging out in closed spaces. So right now is really thinking, even Campus Martius, Grand Circus Park, these places that growing up, and if you went to Cass, and I don't know when you graduated, but I'm guessing it's somewhere near, because you mentioned Trappers Alley, so it's somewhere around with me, is, Grand Circus Park, not someplace you hang out in the 80s and 90s. And when, even like we went to, they had an outdoor car show where they had cars at all the different parks downtown. And so we went to Grand Circus Park, we went to Capitol Park, which used to be Pigeon Park to me. Then you go over to Campus Martius, and just those kinds of experiences, Beacon Park. I just enjoy seeing these spaces that have been reinvented. I continue to be concerned in monitoring, who is using these spaces and making sure that all these new spaces and places are welcoming to the entire community. That is something that I'm always watching is, I want to see this city be a thriving city. I also want to see this city be a place for everyone. And so when you go into new restaurants and places and spaces that have been reinvented in a city that's majority minority, one of the first things I'm looking at is who's here and who's welcome here. And so in everything I'm doing, I'm very intentional about particularly supporting Black businesses, supporting minority-owned businesses, but also just really helping people even think into that conversation. Like, what is going on here, and how do we make space? What can I do to help? Because in as much as we want this city to be like other places, like I remember growing up, and I wish Detroit were like wherever I visited. But then when you start digging back and peeling back the layers, do we really want to be like that? Where you have incredible divisiveness between socioeconomics and race, and I think we want to be a little different. I think we have the opportunity to create a space that is welcoming to everyone and really creates opportunity for everyone. But if we're not intentional and careful, we're not going to get there.
Yeah, I know, because one of the things I remember just growing up about Detroit, there was nowhere in the city that I didn't feel like I could go. There was nowhere in the city that I felt was restricted.
There were probably places you shouldn't have gone, but yes, there was no place you couldn't go.
Yeah, but I went to Cass, so we had to travel through Cass Corridor, which
That's
is
right.
Midtown now.
That's
It's a whole different times.
Well, yeah, and I used to have to catch 3 buses home, and so I went to Renaissance, but I lived down
Selfless.
by
Good.
right near here, so I had to catch 3 buses home. We got off at Grand River right by Cass, where all the Cass kids got on the bus and rode the Grand River down with me. But yeah, there were, you went everywhere, and that was at a time with pay phones and not cell phones.
Yeah.
And I think about that sometimes. Like you
Went
went all
anywhere.
over the place,
Yeah.
and probably places
Probably
you shouldn't
shouldn't
have gone. But yes.
So, what is something someone visiting the city has to do while here?
So many things. Where do you start? I think you can go along all kinds of different routes here. So let's talk about like nature type experiences. So definitely Belle Isle. Definitely, if you're here, you've lived here, you've never been to Belle Isle, that is a must. The aquarium is back open, one of the oldest aquariums in the country, if not the oldest. The conservatory there is one of my favorite places growing up, and even now. I find it to be one of the most peaceful places in the city. The banana tree, they're always like, it was always this piece of, there's a banana tree in the middle of Detroit. Like, this is this amazing piece of like discovery in that conservatory. And then the nature zoo at Belle Isle, the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, all like Belle Isle as a whole is a place, a must. Eastern Market is a must on a Saturday. You know, it doesn't matter, fall, winter, spring, summer, that is a must. I think the DeQuinder Cut, the River Walk, that whole experience, biking it, walking it, you know, I think looking at, you know, one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand when they visit, and honestly, even if you live here and you don't travel around, is to understand how big the city is and how many neighborhoods we have and how different each neighborhood is, and it's unique, and there, you know, the architecture in the city, and just really understanding different neighborhoods. One thing that struck me when I was teaching, we used to take the kids on field trips, and one time we went downtown, the Riverwalk, the Milliken State Park had just opened, so we took the kids down there to do a nature exercise, and one of the students said, "Where are we, Miss Meriweather?" And I said, "We're in Detroit. There's the Renaissance Center." He said, "This is not the Detroit I know." But that's the truth.
Yeah.
Majority of my students lived and stayed within like 10 square blocks. And it's really important, not just for people visiting, but for people who live here, to understand what's here, what is, and what's free, what's available to, like, this doesn't cost anything. It does cost gas to get here, and that's a challenge when you don't have a car. But there are, you know, transportation is improving. There's these, you know, various conversations that are happening. I won't go down that road except to say it's really important to have exposure, whether you live here or you're visiting, to understand all the components of this city and the various neighborhoods. And there's a lot of history here, a lot of history. And then I didn't even get into, I mean, the DIA, you know, one of the best art institutes in the entire country. I mean, I think when you look at the Charles Wright, you look at the Historical Museum, the Cultural Center. One of my favorite traditions every year is Noel Night. I mean, that is one of my favorite. I grew up going to Noel Night every year.
Yeah.
My parents say they went to the first or second one that ever existed. And there was like 20 people, you know, 50 people, and they were like, "We sure hope this thing continues because this is a really good idea." And it just shows when people have a vision and idea, stick with it, you know, it grows and look at what it's become.
Yeah, Noel Night is one of our favorite events. We're sad they already canceled it, COVID.
Hopefully next year.
Yeah.
Hopefully next year.
Okay. Second to last question is, where can we find you?
Well, you can pretty much always find me in the city somewhere, but for work, I can be found at Alycia.Meriweather at DetroitK12.org or at DetroitK12.org. You look for a leadership team, you'll find me there. But you'll probably find me walking around Clark Park or along the Riverwalk or someplace like that. I do not have a social media presence.
Okay.
That is one thing I have never gotten into it. So
Okay.
My Facebook page still has a blue icon and really no pictures, and I'm not on Twitter. I'm literally not in any social media. So you have to find me via email or in person, or you can find my phone number and leave me a message on our main website.
Okay. And any final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, I just would like to thank you again for having me. My final thoughts are, if you are out there thinking of being a teacher, I just want to come back to what I said before. It is the greatest career decision you could ever make. But I don't ever say that lightly to give people false understanding that it's easy. It is extremely challenging work, but it is the best work I've ever done. And I cannot think of another career that when you literally do that job well, it influences generations. Like when you invest in a human, it's never a waste. When you invest time in a human, it's never a waste. But when you invest time in a young person, it gives dividends for generations. Like, there is nothing else like it. And second, when you do that job well and you exit that space, you know you left a hole. I mean, you're just not replaced. And there are other careers and jobs where I think you can leave and they'll just pop somebody else back in. And education is not that way. And especially in DPSCD in the city of Detroit, when you're doing a good job and you are no longer there, you are missed. Like, we're gonna fill the vacancy and hopefully someone else comes that can do as great a job as you. But there's nothing like knowing that, I mean, literally, it matters. It matters if you come to work. And so I just encourage people, if this is something you even think you want to do, reach out to me. And, you know, we'll go on some school visits. I'll get you in a classroom, get with a mentor teacher, and see if we can get you on that path.
That sounds awesome. Thank you, Alycia, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen, Alycia Meriweather, Deputy Superintendent for Detroit Public Schools Community District. Thank you for listening to the DDP. This is a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. You can find us anywhere you get your pods. Please rate, review, and subscribe. This podcast is directed and produced by Marlon Franklin, edited by Mackenzie Hewitt, writing contributions by James Neely and Florence Alexander.